Now, Holmes was once proclaimed the golden girl of Silicon Valley. For more insight on the case, we're joined now by Sherr, CNET's editor at large. Ian, thank you for joining me this afternoon. Can you kind of give me a scope of just how big this scandal really is for Silicon Valley?
I mean, as pointed out in the piece, Theranos was one of the biggest tech companies that existed in terms of people's attention and also in terms of the promise that a lot of people saw. I mean, Elizabeth Holmes, right, the CEO of that company, she was one of those Steve Jobs-like figures. She was on the cover of magazines, and there were glowing profiles written about her. And she had this amazing story about coming out of Stanford and all of these types of things. And it's really, really interesting to watch it kind of just unfold and fall apart. And particularly because of the way Theranos went about dealing with it. When the Wall Street Journal came out with their first story about it, they really started to push back. And then it just started getting worse and worse and worse. And now we're here at this point where it's very much a low point, right? Now we are finding out a lot of the details about what happened at that company. We're going to probably learn quite a bit of unsavory details about how Theranos tried to hide a lot of what they had done, which is what's been accused in a lot of the news reports out there. So it's going to be very interesting to watch, but also a very bad moment for Silicon Valley.
Definitely. I mean, for them to be facing up to 20 years in jail, that just gives you kind of the scope of how big this really is. Affected patients are expected to speak during this trial. Holmes is expected to speak as well. Any idea what we can expect to hear from someone like her?
Yeah, it's going to be definitely interesting. I've seen her speak a number of times, and look, she's a captivating speaker. So I'm going to be very interested to see how she tries to honestly be able to look good in any way in all of this, right? Because a lot of the media reports, and there's a book, Bad Blood, by John Carreyrou, who's the person who broke the news at the Wall Street Journal, and she does not come across well in all of that. And so I think that what's been interesting so far is we've seen she's trying to push a lot of the blame onto Balwani, and also there are these accusations of being mistreated as well. So I don't know. It'll be very interesting to watch this whole thing.
Obviously, when it comes to the tech world, men are really at the top. How much of an impact does this type of situation have on women in tech?
We've heard some rumblings that there's definitely indications that, especially if you're a woman working on a medical tech startup, that it is harder to get people's attention these days. But, part of the problem here is that, generally speaking, Silicon Valley has had a problem with women for a long time, and minorities, by the way. And so this is something that just kind of, in a lot of ways, adds to those cultural issues. And look, I mean, this is what a lot of people always hope is an aberration, right? It's an extreme example of accused fraud. I think what will be interesting is to see how a lot of people kind of figure out how to recalibrate after this, right? How do we treat the next Steve Jobs type figure out there? That'll be the real test of how we look at all of this.
Definitely. Ian, anything else that you find interesting about this case that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm going to be really looking for is not only, how does she respond on the stand and all of that, but also, a lot of people have become kind of enamored with this love idea of who the wonderful CEO of a company is, right? And there is this worship of the CEO that a lot of people have. And look, there are some geniuses out there who are running these companies. I am not debating that. But I think that the last few years is significantly different, even from when Elizabeth Holmes had her downfall. Now we live in an age where Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, he's not someone who's, talked about as possible presidential material, right? Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, is no longer looked at as this genius who's quiet and thoughtful. Now he's a punchline in Congress. And I think that's something that changes the dynamic of all of this and raises a lot of questions about what do we want Silicon Valley leadership to look like? and how do we want them to act? And very clearly, Elizabeth Holmes has shown us one problem, right? We've seen other criticisms now of other CEOs. I think it's part of a reckoning that needs to happen.
Yeah, the fascination with these founders is definitely on a different course nowadays. Ian, I know the trial is set to begin on September 8th. I know we'll continue to check in with you as it goes on just to get your perspective. Really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.